Have you ever experienced the peculiar feeling of being alone, despite being surrounded by a crowd? It's like standing at a banquet, your stomach growling with hunger, but the server never making it to your table to take your order or to bring you food. Or it's like feeling exhaustion at bedtime, only to find sleep elusive. Your head hits the pillow, and sleep will not come no matter how many sheep you count. The sensation of being alone in a crowd can be a cruel torment, leaving us yearning for just one person to acknowledge our presence, to say, "I see you." Often we mistake physical proximity for emotional connection, blurring the lines between the two. Yet they are distinct. Simply being surrounded by people doesn't guarantee a sense of understanding or emotional resonance. In fact, the presence of others without genuine emotional connection can exacerbate those feelings of isolation. You could reside in a team or in a town with thousands of people and still feel profoundly alone. Or live in a metropolis bustling with millions of people, yet lack any meaningful connections. You have the paradox of the internet. Everyone in the world connected by a cable. But despite that connection, profound disconnection. More individuals feeling emotionally adrift. In the Garden of Gethsemane, the story we just read, is Jesus experiencing this same emotional isolation, the anguish of not being understood while he's there in the garden with his three closest disciples? He returns from prayer, tormented by the impending suffering, and then he says to his disciples, "Are you asleep? Could you not keep awake for just one simple hour?" His voice tinged with disappointment at the lack of understanding, at the feeling of being alone, which it has to compound his agony. Often when we hear these stories of Jesus' passion, we think of Jesus' passion solely as the result of the suffering at the hands of the soldiers, the suffering because of his crucifixion. Yet his suffering begins with his disciples' lack of connection to him. In the garden, they're sleeping, unable to grasp his anguish, and they're soon to scatter. And even his most steadfast disciple will disavow any knowledge of him. Jesus' solitude in suffering begins there in the garden with his followers, us, falling asleep. You know what emotional distress is. You've felt it, we've all felt it, and you know how it can get in the way of emotional connection. It makes it harder to feel understood. It's difficult to put our feelings into words or to hear the attempts by others to connect with us emotionally. When Jesus returns from his prayer time in anguish, over his approaching suffering, and he finds the disciples asleep again. It says there in the Bible, their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. They didn't know what to say to him. They didn't know what to say to connect to him. Their emotional disconnection made it harder for them to find words to create understanding. I've told you this story before, but it still sits with me. I remember when I moved to Toronto for university, arriving in May to work 4 months before school started. And I didn't know a soul in Toronto. I was working the midnight shift, and that made it even more difficult to connect with people. I was homesick and alone, and it was emotionally difficult. So I'd walk down Yonge Street just to brush shoulders with people walking in the crowded sidewalk. I wouldn't dodge hurried pedestrians and let them bump into me. I didn't bother avoiding collisions with those tourists trying to follow their map. This is in the olden days, before GPS. If you imagine Yonge Street was a sidewalk obstacle course, I traipsed into every available obstacle. But it didn't solve the loneliness. It just made it feel lonelier. As we turn the corner into Holy Week, we struggle to stay emotionally connected to Jesus, to understand how God is emptied of power, emptied of life on the cross in an effort to connect with us. We don't realize that we're the ones disconnecting. In the silence of Jesus' struggle in the garden, we find a profound mirror to our own moments of isolation and despair. It's in those moments that we cry out, and then we hear no answer. When we reach out, and we find no hand reaching back to us. That we come face to face with something that's very real about being human. But it's also in that moment that we can find some comfort in the knowledge that Jesus too, like us, in the garden, is experiencing that isolation, that human sense of being alone. And strangely enough, in that we can find hope. That's not the end of the story. When Sarah and I, our youngest daughter, Monica, was in high school, she did an exchange with a girl from Bordeaux, France. Her name was Anne-Laure, great French name. And after just 3 days living with us, Anne-Laure looked tired. You just see the melancholy, not just on her face, just all about her. In just a few days with us, she was shutting down. And so when we talked with her, we realized that she was missing her hugs. The ritual of getting multiple hugs from her mother every day. And so the solution was really simple. We just assigned Sarah on mom duty, and Sarah hugged Anne-Laure before school and after school and before bed. And immediately, Anne-Laure started to flourish. Anne-Laure's feeling lost and then found by a hug reminds us of the power of love and compassion to connect us, to change us. It's just a simple gesture of a hug. Pretty simple, just to bring comfort and re-energize anyone. Our acts of kindness Our empathy can uplift anyone who's feeling alone and forgotten. In reaching out to others with genuine care and understanding, we not only dispel the darkness of isolation, but we become a source of light in a world that is running short on connection. So yes, you can feel alone despite being surrounded by people. Jesus realized this hard truth despite being surrounded by an enthusiastic crowd creating a parade just days before, despite sharing an intimate meal with his followers who hung on his every single word and deed. And as he walked to his crucifixion, he realized he was alone. And even on the cross, he uttered the words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But he did it so that we won't be alone. That although once we were lost, we are found. That once we were dead, but now we're alive. That even when you think you are alone, even when you're surrounded by people and feel alone at that hour of need, God looks at you in the eyes and says, "I see you."